your voice of the Rams, Brendan McGuire. Hi, Brendan. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, Tegan. Better than the Rams were at the end of the game Saturday. It was a real heartbreak for them, but great weekend, football weekend for Saskatchewan, that's for sure.
It was almost hard to keep up. There was so much going on, and you did mention the heartbreak in that Hardy Cup. So let's recap that a little bit. The Rams lose by a single point. Brendan, I was in the SportsCage lounge. We were doing the pregame show, and I know you were on the air at the same time calling the game, and everybody was constantly coming up asking for updates, and it was a nail-biter towards the end there. But the Rams were up heading into that final quarter and managed to, frankly, blow it. So the tides shifted. It was a dramatic finish. What did you see from your viewpoint?
I feel like I'm blowing this camera angle. Maybe I'll get it. No, you know what? Football is the ultimate what-if sport. And I'm just going to hold this. And, at the end of the day, people can complain, well, gee, what about this? What about that? It was just a great football game all around. I don't think it's a game that I'll ever forget. It kind of reminds me of the 2004 West final between Saskatchewan and BC. A lot of the Rider fans will remember it because Paul McCallum missed that field goal. And that's not why I remember it. I remember it because it was just an amazing football game. I felt like it would have been great if it would have gone to like triple or quadruple overtime. And sometimes that just happens. That's the sport that it is. And, a lot of people will look at it and say that the Rams blew it in the second half, and they had a 15-point lead going to the fourth quarter. They were still moving the football, but they just weren't able to finish drives. And there were miscues on both sides. When you think about all that the Rams had to go through, including not having their star running back, that's a pretty big obstacle to overcome. But the Huskies had their own obstacles that they had to overcome, too. They didn't have their number one quarterback, and they haven't had their number one quarterback since week 5. And they would have had a much better shot if they did have their number one signal caller. So ultimately, both teams had issues and disadvantages that they had to deal with. I just think of it as a great game played by two great teams. The first quarter, the ball looked a little frozen, or I think the fact the ball was frozen impacted the ability of both offenses to pass because the passing game wasn't impressive at all. And then in the second quarter, it was like a gunfight broke out, and there were lots of big plays that were being executed. The Ram receivers really came to play on this day. Blake Laidlaw and Ryland Sokol and Emmett Stedman, Nick Sirleaf, and I know I'm forgetting others, but there were a lot of big catches made in this game. There you can see the one into the end zone. I think that one was to Caleb Sens. And all in all, I just thought it was a great that one was to Stedman. It was just a great football game played by two teams who were fighting it out for a championship, and someone had to lose, and unfortunately for Regina, that had to be the Rams on this day.
And you did mention that there was some positive flashes, some positive notes for the Regina Rams. Take us through that Brandon Wong fumble recovery scoop and score. That looked wicked. Yeah,
in the third quarter, the Huskies had a dreadful time on the snaps all day long. And there was one earlier in the game that was snapped over Jake Farrell's head, and he jumped on it. It was a 17-yard loss, big sack. And then it happened again here in the third quarter. These were the only second-half points scored by the Rams when Brandon Wong picked it up and ran it in, as you can see there on the video. So credit to him, credit to the Ram defense. Listen, Daniel Weeb is the Canada West Player of the Year. And coming into this game, everybody suggested that if the Rams were going to have a chance, they were going to have to try to shut down Weeb, Regina's Riker Frank, the running back, or Dawson Lene, those three. And they did a really nice job in shutting down Daniel Weeb. It kept him to 75 yards. Crazy to think that someone who got 75 yards was shut down, but it was very sneaky 75 yards. I was really surprised to see he had that much in the game. Riker Frank had close to 200 yards of all-purpose, and Lene was mostly a non-factor. So the Regina defense did a number on them. I keep talking about the mess ups with the snaps. But I think the Regina defense had a little something to do with that. And after that scoop and score by Brandon Wong, the Huskies swapped out their center. They're very odd in how they use their offensive linemen. They sometimes dress as many as 8. I don't know any other team in football that does that, and it seems like they shift people around. So they brought in a different center after that particular play, and I think there was a procedure call, but other than that, they didn't have any more issues. So credit to the Huskies for making that change, understanding, hey, this isn't working, and they made the change when they had to. Another thing that wasn't brought up enough is that in that third quarter, Saskatchewan's quarterback, Jake Farrell, was looking directly into the sun. Like, it was really glaring. That was right the time of day as it's coming down, and you could tell he wasn't on with his receivers. And I wonder if maybe the center doing the snaps got a little bit of a disproportionate, unfairly disproportionate amount of the blame, and some of it might have been the issue with the sun.
Well, Jake Farrell, you bring him up by name. 25 completions, 356 passing yards, 2 tutties, Hardy Cup MVP. So he must have been doing some things right, hey?
Yeah. Oh, no, he played a great game. He's a second-year guy, went to Holy Cross in Saskatoon, and who just won the provincial championship. They beat Miller and Regina. And I'm actually glad that you brought that up because that kind of ties into another thing. We just taped the weekly TV show on Access today. That's going to air tomorrow because of the holiday. And if you talk to Mike Thomas, the CEO of Football Saskatchewan, the amount of youth playing football in Saskatchewan in 2005 was 5,000. Today, it's 25,000. The sport is rapidly growing in our province. And I remember I was a reporter every day on the ground in the late 2000s. And people would say, well, Saskatchewan's a football-mad province. And I'd say, no, not really. We're a rider province, but we're still very much a hockey province. And we're still a hockey province, but I wouldn't say we're not a football province anymore. We are very much a football province. And I think a big reason why you saw the Rams and the Huskies finish 1-2 this year and meet in the Hardy Cup for a second straight year, just the third time ever that's happened, is part of a long-term sea change that is happening. The Saskatchewan teams were long at a disadvantage because the talent pool that they have to draw from is much smaller than, say, UBC or Alberta or Calgary or even Manitoba. But because Saskatchewan's minor football community and the flag football community is growing so rapidly, not just because of the Rough Riders, but also because of the popularity of the NFL in this country and the fact that NFL is funding all of the flag football, that has made such a difference to the point now that the Rams and the Huskies actually have a really deep talent pool to pull from. And I think Jake Farrell's a good example of that. He's only second year out of high school, and he was able to step in. And I'm not going to say that the Husky offense didn't miss a beat, but they've won every game since he came in, and including the one over the Rams, they're 5-0, and they just beat a great football team on Saturday. And just to put into perspective how big that game was, Tegan, from a historical perspective, the Rams and the Huskies entered that match with a combined record of 15-3, 833 winning percentage. That has never happened before in the history of the two programs meeting in the playoffs. And it sets up a very intriguing finish to what could be the greatest football year in Saskatchewan's history, because I'm sure it's been talked about on the air already, but we've had years where the Rough Riders have won a Grey Cup and the Junior Rams or the Thunder or the Hilltops have won a national championship in the same year. That's all happened before, and it could happen this year. But we've never had the trifecta where a college team from Saskatchewan has won the Vanier Cup. And there's a very real possibility of that happening in Regina in, 11, 12 days. So it's just another sign of how far things have come with Football Saskatchewan.
Yeah, wouldn't that be something? The first ever time the Vanier Cup comes here and potentially a Saskatchewan team wins it. Before we move on to the Mitchell Bowl, I do just want to get your take on this a little bit because you mentioned it right off the front. Football is a game of what ifs. So I am going to ask the question, what if Marshall Erickson was healthy and suited up for this one? I'm sure that thought crossed your mind, Brendan.
Oh, totally. Yeah. And we thought about it. We talked about it during the broadcast. I think all things being equal, if there were no other changes, if Marshall suits up, you have to think that would have given them the extra edge. They really never did get the run game going. If they needed 2-3 yards, Katendi was pretty reliable that way. I think the biggest difference as to why the Huskies had a little more success with the ground game was we knew that both teams were going to be really geared up to stop the run in this game, and that was the case. Riker Frank and the Saskatchewan offense really made an effort to get outside. He was running side to side. He was trying to get outside the tackle box, and sometimes he was successful, sometimes he wasn't. With the Rams, there was a lot more bulldozing right up the middle, and I don't fault them for doing that. I mean, Katendi's as good of a smash mouth, cloud of dust running back as you're going to find. But I think there was a little bit of a deficit there for the Rams at the end of the day, and partly why they came up short. Listen, you're never going to replace Marshall Erickson. When Daniel Weeb won Canada West Player of the Year, I kind of paused for a while, and I don't want to look at it through Ram-colored glasses. I think that you could flip a coin over who the Canada West Player of the Year was. And Marshall made up 39% of their offense during the regular season. So how do you replace that? You can't. They tried to do it by committee. I thought the receivers really stepped up. They made some great catches. I told Paul Harrison, the receivers coach, after, I said, boy, your crew really came to play today. But when the game is so frigid and the ball, we say it didn't impact, but it did. You could tell that the ball being somewhat frozen impacted the ability to throw it. And more importantly, it impacted the ability to kick it. So there were points left on the board that they otherwise would have had in the kicking game. And when you don't have your stud running back, it's really hard to replace that. So I took the long-winded way around to answer your question, which is yes, I think the Rams would have won the game. But I keep reminding myself that the Huskies didn't have their number one quarterback. And if you throw him into the equation, all bets are off again.
It's a very different ball game at that point. You mentioned the cold weather and the kicking. Unfortunately, the punt attempt for the Rouge falls just short in the dying moments of that game. They could have tied it up. That had to have been so emotional on the sidelines when that play unfolded. If I'm not mistaken, 11 players were in their final year of eligibility for the Rams, so that's got to be a hard pill to swallow.
Yeah, definitely. No question about it. And, on that final play, I've thought 30 ways to Sunday how they could have done it differently, and I know the Rams have too. I think that if the weather was, say, 3 or 4 degrees Celsius warmer, they'd probably try a field goal because that would have been a 55-yard field goal. And Ty Gorniak, who's the great story, 18 years old, the youngest athlete ever to score points in U of R Rams history, or in University of Regina history, period. He's made one, they say, from 62 yards in practice. Now, just because you can make one in practice doesn't mean you will in a game. But during the regular season, his longest was just inside 45. And I seem to recall being told that they would try it within 50. So 55, end of a game, you would try it. But because the ball was a little bit hard, they had to try the punt. And that was a very low percentage play. Right? Because you have to remember, Isaac Wagner has to get that ball. They scrimmage it at the 47, so he's got to hit it like at least 50 yards deep, which CFL punters have a tough time doing that. He's got to try to get hang time under it so that the cover team can get down. He's got to try and angle it close to the sideline, but even that's risky because if he misses it a little bit to the right, then it goes out of bounds before it reaches the end zone and the game's over. I'm glad you keep showing that footage because one thing that was pointed out to me today was that the Huskies didn't come after him at all. They scattered away. And I guess, maybe he could have tried to walk with it for a bit or jog a little bit and get 5 or 10 yards. Because if he does that and he's able to get the same kick away, he gets it deeper into the end zone and his cover team has them surrounded a lot better. But I mean, again, there's still a lot of ifs because if he has to run, is he going to have the energy? Can he kick the ball that deep when he's on the run? I mean, it was also an example of, I've always been of our athletes are inferior to the National Football League, and that's not a shot at the CFL athletes, but the NFL athletes are amazing. But we have the superior rules, and I still truly believe that. And that was an example of it right there. If that's a 4-down American style game, you're trying a Hail Mary, which is a really low percentage play. This at least gave them a fighting chance. I thought it was a cool play to end the game, and very fitting that it would end on a play like that, given the contest and the magnitude of what happened before our eyes on Saturday.
When you bring up Canadian rules versus American football rules, I think you just stirred the pot a little bit there, Brendan. That text line is going to be blowing up.
Hopefully.
Because, yeah, that's a whole other topic of conversation we shouldn't get into right now. We're going to be here all afternoon if we do. But Saskatoon will now host the Mitchell Bowl, taking on Queens this weekend. How do you see these two teams stacking up? Who has the edge?
That's a great question. It's really hard to say because they're in different conferences, which is one thing I like about it. It just adds to the unpredictability. You know what? One of the big things that makes the NFL so successful is the competitive balance, right? They've got things like a salary cap, they've got revenue sharing. And so it's not like baseball where New York beats on the small teams. And we saw it in the baseball playoffs how the Dodgers beat up everyone except the Blue Jays, even though they eventually won that series. College football is not quite that compelling. You have a lot of haves and a lot of have-nots, and it's really bad in the United States. And it's bad in most of Canada. Like in the Maritimes, they're not super strong. Quebec, it's Montreal and Laval beating up on each other, and that's it. I think those two teams have lost one game in like the last 8 or 10 years to anyone but each other. Ontario's a little more open. And here in Saskatchewan, it's like the NFL from a competitive balance standpoint. You don't know who's going to win from week to week. So for those reasons, I really like the Huskies' chances because they've had to grind out a lot of victories. Now, Queens upsetting Laurier is massive because Laurier was number one in the rankings all year long, dominating the competition. So for Queens to get through means that the Huskies will have a much more beatable opponent than we would have thought earlier. It's also important to note that of those Ontario teams, since they started doing the Mitchell Bowl, anytime they've come out west, they have gone 0-3. And anytime an Eastern team from Ontario or the Maritimes has come out west for a Mitchell Bowl, the Western team has gone 8-3. So, historically, that would tell us that the Huskies have a really good shot at it. And I believe that they do. It also adds a little bit of extra salt into the Rams' wounds because if they don't let that Hardy Cup get away from them, they're at home playing a beatable opponent that they have to get through to get to the Vanier Cup. So great for Saskatchewan. Maybe stings a little extra for the U of R Rams knowing that. But again, I took the long way around to answer your question. I like the Huskies' chances.
Okay. I think there's going to be a few, Rams fans that might be needing to throw their support behind the Saskatchewan team this weekend. A lot of people will be cheering for them. You know what? Last year, Brian Tauris, the legendary Huskies coach, sounded like a guy who was pulling for the Rams. So I don't think there's any harm in cheering for your provincial rival. But at the same time, a lot of Ram people who get caught up in the rivalry won't be cheering for the Huskies, and I can understand that too. I can completely appreciate that. You know what? You do you. Let's move over to the CFL quickly here because I know we are running short on time, Brendan. Riders, Lions, what a game. What were your major takeaways from that one? I know there were some gambles that Corey Mace made, but anything else that stands out?
Well, I think that Coach Mace is the best coach in the league right now. It's easy to say that when they're going into a Grey Cup, but I do believe that. I don't know what the financial details are on his extension, but it should be a giant raise because I think he's the biggest X factor that they have here and why they've been so successful the last 2 years. I don't buy into the narrative that they won that game because of his call to take the field goal and fight back later. I choose to believe they won that game in spite of his call. I've thought about a lot of different reasons as to why they would have done this and how it helped them or how it hurt them. I don't believe it helped them win. But you know what? Ultimately, they ended up winning, so he looks like a genius. And one thing I do appreciate about his explanation in the press conference after is, normally I would go for it, but I went with my gut here. And I really like that because too often in sports today, it's really bad in Major League Baseball, but it's bad in all the sports. Coaches they overthink things and they outthink themselves. instead of just going with their gut. And his gut told him, let's take the points here. I have a feeling we're going to get the ball back, and I have a feeling that Trevor's going to make this happen, and our receivers and everybody else on the last drive, and they did. So you have to give him credit for that, and that will live in infamy. It's not as bad as the Jason Moss doing the exact same thing in the 2017 West Final, Edmonton at Calgary. I looked it up, and when Mace decided to just take the 3, there was about 2:43 left on the clock. Well, when Jason Moss did it and was ridiculed after because it blew up in his face, there was only 1:43 left. So that extra minute makes a pretty big difference. And it's also a reminder that with these new rule changes coming, especially with the play clock, we don't have a lot of clarification about how they're going to handle the last 3 minutes. Let's make sure we hold the league office accountable that if our 3 minutes is impacted, that they have to call an audible and switch back, because the last 3 minutes in Canadian football are the best, and Saturday proved it.
Oh, so wildly entertaining. I think that took a couple of days off my life at the very least. But you mentioned Moss. It's Mace versus Moss. It's the Grey Cup. It's the big matchup in Winnipeg. We know the Riders are not going to be in the Winnipeg home locker room, but that's fine. That aside, what do you see this upcoming weekend? Grey Cup, you got Trevor Harris, maybe Davis Alexander on the other side. It depends on that hamstring, right? But I mean, he's dangerous. 13-0 as a starter, and McLeod Bethel Thompson has fared decently well against the Riders this season as well.
Yeah, I don't have a doubt in the world that Alexander's going to play. He may not be at 100%. He may not be able to. The big question is, can he do those rollouts? Mm-hmm. I'm an old soul, and I've watched a lot of the old footage because I'm always curious about what Warren Moon looked like when he was quarterbacking in the Canadian Football League. And a lot of what Alexander does reminds me of that. Now, I asked others from back then, and they say, nah, not really. So maybe that's not totally accurate. But I think what makes him special is his ability to move around. And if his hamstring is aggravated, that is going to be a problem for the Alouettes. That said, there is a blueprint to beat a Corey Mace defense. We saw it by Calgary, and we also know that Montreal has some of those tangibles to put together a game plan like that. Now, whether Jason Moss follows that blueprint and is able to execute it, and Davis Alexander is able to execute it, that remains to be seen. But the blueprint is out there. The blueprint to beating Davis Alexander does not exist yet. He's 13-0. And so that concerns me greatly if I'm the Saskatchewan Roughriders. Some have suggested, well, McLeod Bethel Thompson had a field day with the Rider defense, so if he has to come in, he could do that again. I don't worry about that one iota. That game was such an outlier. We learned how valuable having a good Canadian corner is in Tavon Campbell and how much it hurts when he's out. And I don't believe that they're going to have any of their big guns in the secondary out for this game. So ultimately, I am picking Montreal to win on the TV show. Spoiler. But I mean, I reserve the right to change my mind as the week goes. I mean, if something really bad happens with Alexander, then it'll be advantage Riders. I think it's going to be a great Grey Cup, a pick'em game.
Yeah, it could be an instant classic, just like the West Final was this past weekend. Brendan McGuire, voice of the Regina Rams, thank you so much for taking the time. Sure appreciate it.
Thank you.